presentation today is going to be about markets, states, and the West. I'm going to start by talking about the first title, which is States, Citizens, and the Legal Order. Now, a little bit of background information, a little bit of historical background. During the 19th and 20th century, the states in the West started to recognize parliamentary and popular governments as the Western countries became nationalist states. Now, what is a nation state? A nation state, in its definition, is a sovereign state of which most of the citizens or subjects are united by factors which define as a nation. Some of these factors could be language or common descent. Though this term has had a lot of controversy because if we take the United States, which is a nation state, as an example, we can notice the existence of a multicultural society, but after all, it is still referred to as a nation state because of the shared American culture. Although the Western states has been seen in ethnic or cultural terms, yet in the recent years we have been seeing them in a rather juridical way, juridical terms. This means that people living in the Western world share the same political life, meaning they are under the same law or jurisdiction rather than sharing the same culture, blood, or past. Maybe this is due to the fact that in some Western countries, like let's take Germany as an example, they use the jus soli doctrine, which translates to right of soil, and it is the right of anyone born in the territory of the state to nationality or citizenship. In the time that these states used to use the jus sanguinis. I don't know how it's pronounced, but it translates to right of blood, and it is a principle of nationality law by which citizenship is determined or acquired by the nationality or ethnicity of one or both parents. This means that people from all sorts of ethnicities and cultures are now citizens of the Western countries. The conversion from nationalist to juridical conceptions of the political community has been related with an ideology of human rights. Thus, one's right does not depend on who he is or what he owns, but on the simple fact that he is a human being. Now, this takes us to our second title, which is Economic and Social Rights and the Welfare State. Let's start with talking about civil and political rights. Civil and political rights, in addition to private property, has been exclusively linked with the Western approach of human rights, principally during the Cold War era. Many researchers agree on the idea that this conception lays its main focus on civil and political rights. But the reality is the opposite of these claims, because during the Cold War, The only region that took indivisibility seriously was the West. Indivisibility in human rights means that human rights are indivisible with whether they are related to civil, cultural, economic, political, or social issues, uh, because human rights are are inherited to the dignity of every human person. Consequently, all human rights have equal status and cannot be positioned in a hierarchical in ascending order. Now, when it comes to private property, perhaps it is the most protected economic right by the government. This shows that the West only focus on particular rights and rarely actually debate the implementation of economic and social rights. The Western states have different ways to reduce poverty, but this process has human consequences. For example, nearly 40 million Americans are excluded from the healthcare system. Now to the third title, which is Inside, Outside, and the Society of States. Uh, we should we should mention the main principle of human rights. Now, human rights has a main principle, and that is that all human beings have the same human rights. The Western states have attempted to give solid expression to this universal principle in their internal and political practice. But the main organizing principle in Western conceptions of international order is the state, and that is why the West prefers the nation state, the national. They prefer the national provision of internationally recognition, and that is why the West prefers the national provision of internationally recognized human rights as their strategy in the national and international politics. This shows us that there is a separation between theory and practice, which in its turn helps create a world of states and protection of the privilege. This separation is explained by three principles, and they are the necessities of political order, narrow self-interest, and the respect for national autonomy and communal integrity. Now, let's talk about global market. The hegemony of implementing economic and social human rights today falls in the hands of the West. And this fact is built around the global market and the hegemony of the West on it. Most states, whether they are large or small, over all parts of the planet, has no interest in creating a central international political authority, because that means their sovereign rights and privileges would be violated. But on the other hand, non-Western states would have interest in aids and resources from the Western states to their nations. but surely without any conditions involved, whether they are economic, political, or human rights related. As we are in a world of sovereign territorial states, markets, whether they are free or managed, is an obvious choice, whereas cosmopolitan warfare As we are in a world of sovereign territorial states, markets, whether they are free or managed, uh, is an obvious choice, whereas cosmopolitan welfare is rejected. As a result of that, uh, we have dominant international norms and institutions that please the world's leading powers. This is what is called Washington Consensus by the neoliberals. And during the Cold War, non-Western states recognized the development could be achieved. Non During the Cold War, non-Western states recognized that development could be achieved by relying on state direction. Moreover, it is the best way to realize economic and social rights. This later was proved to be unsustainable, yet there were countries like Taiwan and Korea that had economic successes by relying on the economic discipline of international market. What most states agree on is that a complex what most states agree on is a complex uh, what most states agree on is that a complex combination of efficiency in production and equity in distribution is acquired to achieve economic and social rights. In short, uh, the commitment to the international markets is a dominant Western vision of the appropriate international path for realizing economic and social rights. This takes us to our last title. We can all agree on that modern national and international human rights values and institutions were in significant measure developed and shaped in the West. This shows no relevance or value of these practices either inside or outside of the West. Human rights is not a case of local application or validity. The whole world should be able to understand these values as they should be applicable to all of them. Uh, if we speak of capitalist or global markets, we do not call them Western markets, although they are dominated by the Western capitals. And if we speak about modern states, which are organized uh, and if we speak of modern states, but if we speak of and if we speak of modern states, uh, they are spread all over the world, although the West played a key role in spreading them and spreading these institutions. We must be very clear that we are drawing on cultural resources for the purpose of human rights advocacy. Not defining human rights by culture. We must be very clear that we are drawing on cultural resources for the purpose of human rights advocacy, not defining human rights by culture. Moreover, working ideas and practices of universal human rights into local cultures with different histories and traditions involves progressive cultural change, just as it did in the West. I'm gonna end my presentation by playing a small video that summarizes everything we talked about.
What is cultural relativism? Cultural relativism is the view that all beliefs, customs, and ethics are relative to the individual within his own social context. In other words, right and wrong are culture-specific. What is considered moral in one society may be considered immoral in another, and, since no universal standard of morality exists, no one has the right to judge another society's customs. Cultural relativism is widely accepted in modern anthropology. Cultural relativists believe that all cultures are worthy in their own right and are of equal value. Diversity of cultures, even those with conflicting moral beliefs, is not to be considered in terms of right and wrong or good and bad. Today's anthropologist considers all cultures to be equally legitimate expressions of human existence, to be studied from a purely neutral perspective. Cultural relativism is closely related to ethical relativism, which views truth as variable and not absolute. What constitutes right and wrong is determined solely by the individual or by society. Since truth is not objective, there can be no objective standard which applies to all cultures. No one can say if someone else is right or wrong. It is a matter of personal opinion, and no society can pass judgment on another society. Cultural relativism sees nothing inherently wrong and nothing inherently good with any cultural expression. So, the ancient Mayan practices of self-mutilation and human sacrifice are neither good nor bad. They are simply cultural distinctions, akin to the American custom of shooting fireworks on the 4th of July. Human sacrifice and fireworks, both are simply different products of separate socialization. In January 2002, when President Bush referred to terrorist nations as an axis of evil, the cultural relativists were mortified. That any society would call another society evil is anathema to the relativist. The current movement to understand radical Islam rather than to fight it is a sign that relativism is making gains. The cultural relativist believes Westerners should not impose their ideas on terrorists, including the idea that suicide bombing of civilians is evil. Islamic belief in the necessity of jihad is just as valid as any belief in Western civilization, the relativists assert. And America is as much to blame for the attacks of 9/11 as are the terrorists. Cultural relativists are generally opposed to missionary work. When the gospel penetrates hearts and changes lives, some cultural changes always follow. For example, when Don and Carol Richardson evangelized the Sawi tribe of the Netherlands, New Guinea in 1962, the Sawi changed. Specifically, they gave up their long-held customs of cannibalism and immolating widows on their husbands' funeral pyres. The cultural relativists may accuse the Richardsons of cultural imperialism, but most of the world would agree that ending cannibalism is a good thing. For the complete story of the Sawi's conversion, as well as an exposition of cultural reform as it relates to missions, see Don Richardson's book, Peace Child. As Christians, we value all people, regardless of culture, because we recognize that all people are created in the image of God. We also recognize that diversity of culture is a beautiful thing, and differences in food, clothing, language, etc. should be preserved and appreciated. At the same time, we know that because of sin, not all beliefs and practices within a culture are godly or culturally beneficial. Truth is not subjective. Truth is absolute. And there does exist a moral standard to which all people of every culture will be held accountable. Our goal as missionaries is not to westernize the world. Rather, it is to bring the good news of salvation in Christ to the world. The gospel message will kindle social reform to the extent that any society whose practices are out of step with God's moral standard will change. Idolatry, polygamy, and slavery, for example, will come to an end as the Word of God prevails. In amoral issues, missionaries seek to preserve and honor the culture of the people they serve. Got questions? The Bible has